Take a look behind the curtain with a real whistleblower and American patriot. Prepare to embrace the uncomfortable truth because this program has no time for comforting lies. Here is civil liberties enthusiast, Second Amendment defender, and recovering FBI agent Kyle Seraphin.
Well, hello, my friends, and welcome to the Kyle Seraphin Show. Today is Monday. It is September the 8th. And thanks for coming along for this ride. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about systems, maybe a quick analysis on systems. And I guess there's a couple of things that have been rolling around in my head that I wanted to discuss. One of them is that a system, it is what it does. It serves the purpose that it spends its time implementing. And so we're going to look at that in terms of the American system, the American institutions that we probably have lost some faith in over the last 5 years, maybe the last 20 years, depending on how long you've been paying attention. And the other one is sort of this interesting little generational experience. The first story that I have comes from NBC News talking about a generational divide. Those of us that grew up in the analog world, those of us that had one foot in each, like I did, and then those who grew up in the exclusively digital world. And maybe the level of propaganda that they're willing to accept, maybe the level of BS, and then the payoff for it. And I have an interesting commentator to kind of give you some evidence of that. I'm kind of in this really frustrated space looking out into an America where we deserve better villains, we deserve better psyops, we deserve better conquerors. This was a point that Steve Friend made on one of his last appearances here on our program. I think all that's true. I think too many people are frustrated with it. And then here's the last really kind of scary thing. I've revisited sort of my overlay of the Cloward-Piven strategy for bringing in significant federal resources, and the end result ends up being sort of like communism and a nationalistic overreach. And Donald Trump seems to be really okay with that. And it's not shocking from a guy who's essentially a 90s Democrat. I don't think Donald Trump is a conservative. I don't think there's an argument to be made that he is. For those people that keep saying, oh, most conservative president in my lifetime, it doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. Just looking at what he does, what he likes. But what you see is this acceptance because of the packaging, perhaps, because of maybe the motivation. I think motivation doesn't have to be bad for the outcome to eventually be bad. But we're kind of in a real scary spot where talking about federalizing Washington, D.C., bringing in National Guard troops, a lot of the other kind of things that you've heard discussed, and now the right is championing, whereas if the left had been doing it 4 years ago, 3 years ago, there would have been outrage, consternation. Isn't it interesting that you don't have to be an intentional Trojan horse to be a Trojan horse for some of the worst things in America, which is federal overreach if you're a conservative person who wants to be left alone and have government closest to you and answerable to you. So I want to discuss some of those things. Of course, there was a sort of a little blip. It's an 18-second video clip that will be able to show that Mike Johnson essentially indicated Donald Trump was an FBI informant. He was inartful with his words, as people can do in the moment. But it also points out to me another problem. Mike Johnson is the Speaker of the House. He was giving a press conference about the Epstein files scandal release, call it whatever you want, this sort of messaging campaign that will not go away. It will not leave the Trump administration. It's dogged. And I think it's a leftist kind of ploy to keep punching it out there. But Trump administration and people who want to support him keep falling into that trap. And what it did make me realize is that we're listening to Mike Johnson talk about whether or not Donald Trump worked with the FBI many years ago in Florida. And what we don't see is anyone asking Mike Johnson a real simple question. Dude, you got put into that chair. We vacated a chair from Kevin McCarthy on one condition. You were going to bring single issue, single item appropriation bills so that the American people could see what it was that everybody voted for individually in our budget. And you didn't do that. And you've never done that. And you've never made an attempt to do that. So why are you not being asked about that every single time that you open your mouth and you failed on every single thing that you campaigned to get into that position to do? So everybody acts like, oh, they get into the system and then they're corrupted or they're co-opted or they're flipped. That's why we have a problem at DOJ. That's why we have a problem at FBI. That's why we have a problem at DHS. That's why we have a problem in fill in the blank, the House of Representatives. I think that once people are in a position to do the thing that they said, we actually just, we don't flip them. They don't change. I think they simply reveal who they actually are and were. I had a really unique experience of someone calling me out and saying that what I said was false about my own history. It's a moment that my father and I had this reflection. Social media is really valuable because what you'll find is that there is an infinite number of people that know how to live your life better than you do, and you don't even have to ask them for advice. They're willing to give it to you for free. They will tell you what is true and what is false about your own experience and history, and then they'll tell you what you should have done better. And I found out that a complete stranger who doesn't even have a picture associated with their face knows how my career progression went and was able to debunk the idea that I left a job paying nearly $100,000 a year to go enlist in our military as an E3 and make $18,000 a year. That's apparently totally false, despite my history of it, despite all my tax returns that would say as much, and despite my, logical understanding at the time of why I did that. That was not true, apparently. And all it makes me understand is that people put their own lens on somebody else, and they assume, well, I would have done the right thing if I was in that moment, and therefore this person would have done the right thing, and if they didn't do it, it's because of some external force. We want to find an external foe that we can blame. When in reality, human nature actually tells us the real story. Under pressure, most people cave. Most people do things that they think is in their own self-interest. And when given an opportunity to do the right thing, they simply reveal themselves that they're unable to do that because they never were going to do that. That is maybe a heavy start for a Monday, but that's where we're going with it. Let's talk about something also heavy. How about government tracking you? How about businesses and big tech tracking you? Data brokers, cyber criminals, take your pick. There are many people that are fighting for a piece of your digital footprint, and they don't ask, they just take it because you walk around with this little tracking device that we call a cell phone, which doesn't even use cells anymore. These things are built in intel gathering platforms. And if you want to shut that sucker down, the best way to do it is to get a Faraday bag and you just manually shut it down at the source. You put them into a Faraday cage or a sleeve. That means that it blocks all wireless signals that is collecting on you. That's cellular, that's Wi-Fi, that's Bluetooth, that's GPS, that's RFID, that's NFC, near field communications. There are many things that your little tracking devices are emitting at all times, and they're always looking to tell something, some other electronics, where you are, what you're doing, how fast you're walking, all the other things that are going on. If you guys want to make sure that you can control your own signal, you can do so with a product from Silent. Check them out. It's slnt.com/KYLE. They are brilliantly designed. They really are. They are well thought out. They are comfortable. They're easy to use. Honestly, there's nothing more simple than sliding into a little pouch, flipping open the magnetic hatch on it, and shutting it down. And then you can go out there and, have some peace of mind. Maybe you can just have some peace because you won't be interrupted. That's the thing we do during the dinner times at our house. It's something that we do when I go for a swim or something like that. If I want to shut down my digital footprint, I simply use my Silent Faraday sleeves and my bags, and they have all kinds of stuff. Everything from dry bags for scuba operations. If you need to go and do some sort of swim infill into a foreign nation, you don't want them to know you're there, but you might want to have that cell phone for your E&E plan, or maybe you're just someone who goes to the pool with your kids like I do. Check them out. Again, slnt.com/KYLE. Check out their Faraday products. Link in the show description. You'll save 15% with my name as a promo code. Let's get into today's program with, hopefully not too deep for a Monday morning. And I mean it. I don't want to get too deep on a Monday morning. I don't want to get too deep in the weeds. So let's start with something that is, let's call it the bargain proposition of news media. And maybe why it's changed in my lifetime. This is a comedian giving you a little take on this. And I don't think he's wrong. I think that as I look at generations, and as being someone who spans two generations, I think technically my age puts me into the category of millennial, but I don't really assign myself to a lot of millennial views. I'm closer to the folks that are Gen X, which means I'm also closer to people who are baby boomers. I actually have a lot more in common with people because most of my formative time and my real sort of structure is built in an analog world. A world where the beginning of this proposition is true, which is that there was an American dream. There was sort of this trade-off. If you do right by the system, if you sort of essentially buy in and participate, then you're going to get a certain number of opportunities. You're going to be able to go and get educated. You're going to go and be able to start a family. You're going to go and start supporting yourself at a pretty young age and stand on your own 2 feet and become whatever the next thing is that is America. And there's a value proposition that is not being bought into right now by people quite a bit younger than me. And I can kind of understand why, because they have the wealth of information at their fingertips that never existed before. We didn't have the internet. We had to go to a library. We didn't have Google. We had encyclopedias. You had to look it up alphabetically and you had to know what the right search term was. And then it took a lot of time. You'd sit there and page through a book manually to find out information. If you just wanted an aggregate summary of something, hey, can you give me just kind of the wave tops? Yeah, you had to go to Britannica, pull it out of your library. Or maybe you were like me, you grew up and you had a full encyclopedia set at home, like many of you did. Your parents thought that was really useful to carry around 400 pounds of paper books so that you could have sort of the collected survey of information that human beings had put together over the last several millennia. In any case, that value proposition is very different right now. And as I see the sort of propaganda messaging go out there, I see less and less people interested in it. And then you also see who's still buying it and why those people are stuck in the past. So let's listen to a quick little clip here, and then we're going to do some commentary on it. And I've got the perfect propaganda segment directly afterwards that came from Fox News, celebrating quote unquote war, which is about the most Fox News boomery, not paying attention to the world, feed me the narrative sort of mentality that you could have. Obviously, if you listen to this, you're already questioning narrative. So it's not necessarily referencing anybody here, but let's look at things some critically. All right, here's a first little sort of opening for a Monday morning.
Young people are realizing they're being propagandized at a level that older people gladly accepted. It was normal. It was fine. Older people were okay with being propagandized as long as they got a few things out of it. The young people are getting nothing out of it. Wait, you're lying to us and I can't own a house? I can barely have a job? I have to be forced into the gig economy? I get to deliver burritos? And I have to listen to this bullshit? And I have to pretend that this is all real? And I can't afford frozen yogurt with my girlfriend? And I have to go along with this horse shit? And I have nothing and no money for it? If you're doing something, you want to get something out of it. If you are going to delude yourself and believe the bullshit on the news, you have to get a little bit out of it. And what Americans got for many years was a patch of dirt, a little driveway, and a chance. They don't have any of that anymore. We've taken that all away from them. We've pushed them into a gig economy. We've pushed them into the hellscape of rent that goes up every single year. And the propaganda is actually getting worse. It's getting more disconnected from reality, more Orwellian. We're asking them to believe crazier and crazier things and taking away the little bit that most people had. People don't want to be billionaires. People want a house, a family, a little retirement plan, some money in the bank if there's an emergency. They want health care. They want some kind of steady job. They want a community with people that share their values. They're getting none of that right now.
That's a pretty damning indictment of the current situation. That's a comedian named Tim Dillon. He has his own podcast. You guys may have seen him. If you don't, I think his commentary is spot on. He's also pretty close to my age bracket. He's 40 years old, so right in the same area. As you guys know, I'm 43. So we grew up seeing a lot of the same things. And he's about at the edge of people who can make that claim before it's like, now you're no longer there. Now you no longer have that experience that you remember on analog. You don't remember downloading your first video. You don't remember a dial-up internet connection. I saw somebody doing sort of a farewell. I guess AOL just got rid of its dial-up connection options, which is kind of amazing that there is that. And we have this nostalgia. People in my generation have a nostalgia. Maybe some of you do as well. My wife and I were talking the other day about how there's this charming trend where rather than give your kid a cell phone, you give them a landline like we had. And the possibility is that somebody will dial up and somebody in the house will pick up and it won't be the person that you were looking for. So if some young boy who's 13, 14 years old wants to talk to your teenage daughter, they might get this voice on the other end of it. A dad who may or may not be all that sympathetic to this flirtation. How many of us had that experience? Probably most of us. Terrifying stuff. And how exciting was it when they actually did pick up the phone and you got a few minutes to talk to somebody? There was no texting back and forth. There were words coming out of your face hole that went into someone else's ear through some sort of little telephonic copper pair leaving your house and into theirs. Somebody else might be listening in on it too in the other part of the house. If it was a cordless phone, then maybe you heard the static. But if not, maybe someone quietly picked up that phone and the little younger sister or younger brother was listening and would make fun of them later. That's not an experience that kids from my generation are going to have right now. My kids won't necessarily have that unless we go make it for them. And so there are some parents that are doing that. They're creating what they call them landline pods. My wife was telling me about this the other day and I was cracking up about it. I was like, yeah, that's actually a really good idea. How else do you give your kids the thing that you had unless you go out and recreate it? And it's still doable. It is just not the standard. The standard is to go along with the stream and experience all the things. So you've got this gender gap. You've got this views gap between all these generations. And that's always been the case. Every generation looked at the one before them and said, hey, you guys dick this up and you've made this much more complicated for us and we're mad at you for it. And then at some point you realize, well, it probably actually goes back a lot further than that. Like I said, I'm not willing to assign any particular blame to any particular generation. They inherited a system and then they slowly kind of went along with the flow and made it worse. And we can also track the fact that everybody who screwed up the nation that we are in right now and sort of undermines the foundation of this republic, they're not alive anymore. It's a 100-year-old plus problem. So those people would be in their 120s or 130s and it's over. This story, Gen Z's gender divide, reaches beyond politics and it stretches into its views on marriage and it stretches into its views on children and what defines success. I think Tim Dillon was actually talking about a lot of this stuff. And because of their views and, their views on marriage and children and success and politics, I think are probably off. I think they are maladjusted. It doesn't mean that the understanding that propaganda is garbage and that the value proposition in accepting the propaganda and then the thing you get out of it is that you get to live a decent life. That's not necessarily there anymore, at least not in the same way. So I can understand why people are frustrated, but this is the same frustration that my generation went through when we watched, movies or read the books like Fight Club, where everybody thought they were going to be millionaires and rock stars and movie stars because there was this idea that everybody would be famous. That was the entry into the reality television, and anybody could be a celebrity without any particular talent. And they all might be made of money and have this wildly, ungrasped by previous generations' experience of wealth and fame and comfort. And a lot of those things that we have now, you couldn't even fathom 40 years ago. I mean, the idea that you could pick up you could jump on a phone that lives in your pocket at all times, call people from anywhere. Remember, we're talking about a generation like when I grew up, you still had to plan a meeting at the movie theater and hope that there was a payphone there. And if your friends didn't show up, you just waited around for a while and either saw the movie by yourself or maybe you didn't. Maybe you went home. Maybe you had to call for a ride. That was a real thing in my childhood still. So I still share that. Kids don't have that today. They're texting in real time. They're sharing their location and GPS movement so we can watch them like a Blue Force tracker, like you'd see, 1980s Navy SEALs movies, or you'd watch like Escape from New York and there was like a tracking chip. And so they'd show you some garbage sort of like overlay and some digital movement through a map. We have that in real time now. That's every day. That's expected. If my wife doesn't show up exactly where I think she's going to be at the exact time, I'm wondering like, hey, what the hell happened to you? Where are you? Meanwhile, the 80s plan, the 70s plan, the 60s and the 50s plan was just wait. That was it. And then figure out what your time limit was that you would have a backstop. Just find this stuff interesting. Gender divides within adults. 18 to 29 shows up in questions ranging from how Americans feel about Donald Trump to their views on what constitutes success. Young men and women are also feeling very different about mental health, cultural issues, and questions about gender in the workplace. Overall, Gen Z, 64% disapprove of Donald Trump's job performance, 36% approve. But young men are more evenly split, with about 53% versus 47%. 53% actually disapprove, 47% approve. Young women are dramatically more in the disapproval category. There's a 21-point difference between approval ratings, and that remains roughly unchanged since April. And they've got a couple little graphs of it. We can throw them on the screen here for you guys if you want to see that. That's essentially the Trump approval rating, and these are on specific topics. I mean, how many 25-year-olds, let's call it that, because I don't know how many 18-year-olds know anything about anything. How many 25-year-olds have real strong understandings of border security and immigration enough to be able to give you a prove, disapprove on what the president's doing? Deportations and immigration. They're getting a propaganda message one way or the other. They're hearing the Free Palestine people, or they're hearing the rah-rah Trump people over on Fox News, but they're hearing something. What do they know about trade and foreign trade? 42% strongly approve of the president's performance. So kind of a 50-50 split. And again, if you look at the split, the green on the screen are all the male end of it, and the gray is the female end, which is mostly 75+% disapproving of inflation, cost of living, trade, deportations, border security overall. That's what the female end of it is. I'm interested that any of the Gen Z people in that age category, having been someone in that age category not so long ago that I can't remember it, I don't know what any of my opinions would be on those things. But I can see why you would be disaffected by it. I could see why you would look out there and think that things are kind of bleak, and it doesn't really matter who's in charge, because the propaganda proposition that we get is really bad. Here's some of the worst propaganda that I'm able to find. I don't know if it gets any worse than Fox News and what Jesse Waters did the other day. This is a celebration of war, essentially. That's what's going on here. They use Vivaldi to be able to hype up some of the energy of this clip, and then make a judgment that we should be drone striking because that's what we're doing, so we celebrate what we're doing. I see zero critical thinking in this piece. What I see is pom-poms and cheerleading. And again, the value proposition is that if you believed all this stuff, that you were going to get the thing that is the American dream, that patch of dirt and that little driveway and an opportunity to make a living and have a pension and so on, raise a family on maybe one income, maybe two now, as I guess is the standard. Is that really what you're getting from this clip? Because all this tells me is, I don't know who listens to this, but it's uncomfortable. Probably for everybody my age and younger, and hopefully for you as well.
Fox News alert, we're at war. This enemy, they don't wear a uniform. They're moving fentanyl by the truckload.
I want you to look at the contraband that's in front of me. We have 20 kilograms of fentanyl that's in front of me on this table. That's enough to kill 10 million people. The work that we do is to protect people and make sure that we remove these weapons and drugs off of our streets and hold those criminals accountable who would go forward and continue to use that to harm individuals.
Cartels are now officially in the Pentagon's crosshairs. And it's not just the wall anymore. Trump ordered the kill shot. The days of local drug busts and random motels, they were fun, but that's Breaking Bad stuff.
Okay. It goes on, and the audio is a little bit out of sync on that because for whatever reason, the download platforms are not great. But we're talking about celebration of essentially an act of war. We've had a rebranding of the Department of Defense as the Department of War. I don't hate that. I don't hate the idea of calling something what it is. The DOD's job is not actually to do that. So DOW, great. Department of War. That's what they wage. But I've read our Constitution, and I thought we were supposed to have civilian military leadership. And then the other end of it is that Congress has to give you a declaration of war. Are we going to see a request for that? Are we going to see a group of people that are able to actually come together and vote on that? And if they do, and they represent the American people, then great. What if they don't, though? We're just going to act in a way that that has nothing to do with the way the Constitution was put together. Just gonna fling it all out there. I saw this also put out by the Trump administration over the weekend, and I don't know what this flex is, but it makes me very uncomfortable. Okay, here's what it says: no president has signed 200 executive orders this quickly since FDR. That's an official push out by the White House. Now, I remember Joe Biden wanting to be the next FDR. How scary is it that Donald Trump is basically celebrating being the next FDR? Should we not be kind of concerned about that? It doesn't seem like the thing that you'd want to be out there and have everybody hyped up about. It seems actually like the opposite of what a conservative, it seems like the opposite of what a Republican, it seems like an opposite. Even in my own lifetime, Republicans were supposed to be about the small government, weren't they? reduce the size of government? Didn't Reagan say that the scariest words in the English language had to do with the government coming out to help you? And then does this solve any problems permanently, or is this just something that we're going to just be a ping pong ball where we cheer for our team when the ping pong ball is hit by ours, and we're going to have maximum executive orders and then vice versa? The old Donald Trump used to decry this, said this was a problem. He said this is not acceptable under Barack Obama. And now we're celebrating it. The propaganda game is whoever we have, whoever our team is, that's what we're going to cheer. And that scares the crap out of me, because all that says is that Donald Trump, whether he likes it or not, to me, finds himself in this scenario. The Cloward Piven strategy. Now, we can break down that strategy. For those of you that are not aware of it, it's a political strategy that is used to basically overwhelm a local beyond the resources of the local problem. Crime, drugs, take your pick. And if we overload whatever that system is, whether it's public welfare, whether it's law and order, whether it's criminal justice system, whether it's the ability of people to afford housing, which Donald Trump has floated the idea of federalizing a housing crisis, all of this stuff, what you do is then you say, well, there's no choice but the federal government step in. You need the biggest possible tool because it's the biggest possible problem. And if that's what you're going to lean on, you're going to say, we're going to go to the federal government solution. We're going to have the most number of executive orders. We're going to use the Coast Guard and the U.S. military to stop drugs. You're playing into the hands that always and inevitably is sort of the thing that your communists talk about. Look, I'll give you an example at a local level of the problem is so bad that we need to be able to grab all the resources. We need to be able to have full power and might applied to it. They're doing it in New York right now. There's a question about whether or not the local grocery stores should be taken over, whether they should have city-run, state-run, governmental grocery stores. Doesn't that seem problematic for most people? If you were an American, you look out there and you go, oh, there's this guy named Mamdani, and that's not what we're about. And yet, Trump is doing this on a national level right now. And we don't have a lot of people asking the question, like, where does this end? Listen, bringing in National Guard to solve immigration problems, bringing in the Department of War to try to stop the flow of drugs in this country feels exactly the same as this argument about grocery stores.
Why is the government a better solution for a lack of grocery stores, food deserts, than just working with the private sector to have them do what they know how to do, which is run grocery stores? What's your answer to that?
There are more than 1,000 grocery stores in New York City. I'm proposing creating 5 additional ones, one in each borough of New York City that the city would run, and that would guarantee cheaper groceries, not free food, but cheaper groceries. And part of that is because food is a necessity for New Yorkers. It's a necessity for everyone. And yet it's something that people are being priced out of. And we can see the promise and the possibility of a public option. And we've seen in studies that have been done about the applicability of this in an urban setting like Chicago, that this is something we can actually deliver right here in New York City.
But there was another example in Kansas City where they had a government-run grocery store, and it's been there for years, but it's on the verge of closing because it doesn't work. They've been riddled with crime. They've dealt with just a lack of inventory. There are other examples where it just hasn't worked because, frankly, the government is not that good at being in the business of being in grocery stores.
That was a shocking pushback by CNN, wasn't it? Abby Phillips making an actually sentient point about that. Yeah, the government is not really in the business of anything. There's almost nothing that you can think of that your government gets involved in where prices get better, where things become more competitive, where the product is more efficiently delivered at a higher quality to you. Like, the only time that I've ever seen an efficient DMV was when it was done privately. That was in Kansas, by the way, where they couldn't run a grocery store by the state. Just interesting to think about that. There's these statements right now that are coming out. This is an NBC piece as well about Donald Trump. All interesting the way that they actually sort of phrase it. You've got Mamdani on the screen. You've got Donald Trump on the screen. He's one of us. How Donald Trump is trying to influence the New York mayoral race because he's had some comments about it. Now, that he's one of us comment actually came from a New Yorker that has interviewed some random faceless person on the streets of New York, stated he's one of us in so much as that Donald Trump is actually a New Yorker. It's a good reminder. That's where he comes from. That's the mentality that he's going to have. Someone from New York. It's a little different than someone who's from Kansas City or from Dallas or from Omaha, Nebraska, or for somewhere in the wilds of Wyoming. He's a New Yorker at heart. He sees things through the guise of a New Yorker. It's probably why he doesn't have a problem with things like gun control, why he has things like where his mentality is a little bit more geared towards an urban American, which is not the way that all Americans live, and certainly not the way that a lot of his voters think. Kind of interesting on this. There are nothing but bad options outside of Curtis Sliwa, who may or may not be a great option, but the other ones seem pretty bad. You've got Eric Adams, who's had all kinds of questions about corruption, who managed to avoid an indictment by basically playing nice with the Trump administration, or managed to avoid further prosecution, I suppose. And then you've got Andrew Cuomo is in the polls and is basically one of the top two contenders. And then this guy Mondami, who's like a young, zero accomplishments socialist, formerly out of the Democratic Socialists of America camp. It's not a good spot where your two top contenders and what basically regular New Yorkers are probably going to have to cheer for is someone like Andrew Cuomo, who was disastrous during COVID and has managed to just revamp his image, and then also had to step down over some sexual allegations and some inappropriate contact with women, a bunch of other things. Like, he was a pretty unsavory dude. How wild. All right, we're going to get into the tie in there and how when you start thinking that government is the solution, or maybe even worse, you think that non-governmental type agencies should just run autonomously. You want to give governmental power to private industry. That even sounds scarier. We're going to get to that in 1 second here, because there's a story about the Fed that kind of bothers me. But first, I'm going to go ahead and plug my friends over at Patriot Coolers. And this is a shameless plug for what I think is probably the most used series of products in my house. I was just talking to my wife about it. We're going to replace some of their plastic water bottles for my kids. The older ones are now going to get some of the metal vacuum packed ones because they like having ice in their water. If you guys like having a cold beverage cold, a hot beverage hot, if you want to have something that comes in a patriotic packaging, if you want to have something that is well thought out and actually kind of reminds you of what at least this country used to be about, 13 bars and 50 stars on the bottom, check out Patriot Coolers. Go to the website, patriotcoolers.com. Whatever you add to the cart, you can use promo code Kyle and you'll save 10%. They've been giving you this deal for as long as we've been running this program. And you can find the link in the show description below. Every dollar you spend, a portion of that is going to go back and help out disabled veterans. Kind of reminds me of the solution to a lot of our problems. Wouldn't it be better if we solved it with private charity, with businesses that were competing for your money and then also doing good things with it? It's an option. You guys can support our folks at Patriot Coolers, and I'm really grateful that they continue to be our ongoing, longest-serving sponsor. And occasionally somebody says something really nasty about me to them, and they just share it with me, and then we have a little chuckle because they understand that they're not going to please everybody. They're going to please people who want a thing that used to exist. Maybe in America that's not quite there anymore. All right, here's a story from CBS. This one says, top White House economic advisor Kevin Hassett says that the Fed monetary policy should be fully independent of presidents. Well, that kind of flies in the face of what you keep seeing done in executive orders. Again, we're now at 200 and the Trump administration was touting it. How does this work? How do you go out there and say that the Fed should be fully independent of presidents at the same time presidents want to be both responsible for and have their hands on a lever that changes and controls the way money is put out into our economy? We weren't supposed to have a system where the president was a temporary four-year king. And it brings me to another problem that we've got with these four-year kings, which is that what happens when you can't actually get the people that are in the administration? Why can't you? Like, what happens when you can't actually even get them confirmed? We've become so ridiculous right now that we've got Eric Schmidt going out and talking about the gridlock of not being able to get political appointees in under the Trump administration in a way that has not happened before. We are almost at 20% done with Donald Trump's second term, and many of the critical positions are still in acting roles and they can't actually get people confirmed. Isn't that wild? I'll read you real quickly about this thing. I mean, to think that we are going to be able to put one person in charge of the massive bureaucracy of 3+ million human beings that work for our federal government. And as I understand it, it's the single largest employer. By the time you add the contractors and all the peripheral employees, it's ridiculous. It's absurd. And this system is doing exactly what it is supposed to do right now. And I guess that's what bothers me. The system is interested in continuing the power of the system. And so spinning off little autonomous groups like the Fed and having other agencies sort of take on their own lives. When we talk about something called the self-licking ice cream cone, it doesn't start that way, but it certainly does evolve into that. And I'm going to show you what that looks like at the worst level when we start talking about influence peddling and lobbyists and foreign interests coming in, because initially a system is set up because it's like, well, let's address a problem. Here we have some problem, whatever that problem may be. You look at it and you go, okay, fine. Well, when we see it, we want to fix the problem. How do we fix it? We fix it by creating a set of rules and putting a couple of people in charge, and they are going to address said problem. And as those people focus entirely on the problem, at some point, they forget that the purpose of solving the problem was serving people who had that problem. And then all they care about is fulfilling the mission of the problem itself. And that's when the ice cream cone starts going from focusing outward on the people that it serves. This is the mission of your government agency, is to actually provide a public good, to the point where the mission of that agency is to fulfill the mission. And then it loops in on itself. And that's when the ice cream begins to lick itself. If your only interest is being autonomous simply because that's what you believe that you're supposed to be, if you want to just manipulate monetary policy, but it's not in the context of a broader good that you're going to do for others. If your goal becomes, how do I keep my paycheck and how do I make money? Then you stop seeing the forest for the trees. You stop seeing like the things that you're doing are actually in direct contrast to the original missions that you have. And your mission is simply defined as your own personal success. This is a story from Lee Fang from January. And it goes into another story about Jason Miller, who came out of the Trump administration. Over the weekend, we saw this bizarre little moment where a bunch of social media influencers, for some amount of dollars, allegedly, they were promoting a pro-India message, which seems in contrast to a pro-America message. And then we've been set up with this sort of like propaganda fight. Some people are America first. Some people are not really America first. Some people are actually claiming to be America first, TM, the brand, and then they're actually me first. That thing that Tim Dillon was talking about, they're still trying to do the 80s version of it, where they're just getting their house and they're getting their driveway and their patch of dirt as nice as, and screw everybody else. There's no interest. There was a question that ran through our chat just a little bit ago before I touched this article. And the question was, what's the solution to this problem? Well, the solution is obviously not going to be government, because we've tried government, and all we've done is make government get more and more specialized, more uniquely focused on government issues. And all it ends up doing is making more and less effective government. So the solution to me is pretty straightforward. It's actually going to be values-based. You're not going to be able to stop drugs coming into the United States by dropping bombs on top of people that can make a fortune in running it into this nation. You have to stop the people who want drugs. That means you may have to help them locally. That may mean that you have to put some skin in the game. You have churches and faith groups and support networks, none of which have anything to do with the government. They have to do with your own interest, your own time, and that proposition that, well, it's like, okay, I could otherwise be making some sort of money, but instead what I want to do is add service into my life. Or you can do what these people do. You can outsource your credibility, your fame, your political power, and your influence over folks, and you can do it simply to enrich yourself. And at the end of the day, what happens? Everything's worse off. You're slightly better off, but maybe your kids are screwed too, because it's very short-sighted. I think this was the appeal that Jordan Peterson offered in, let's call it 2019 and 2020, when I remember, my wife really wanted to go and hear a seminar. He was saying that we have an issue with the ability to look into our communities and make good decisions for ourselves today and in the future, for our family today and in the future, for our community locally close by today and in the future, and then for our broader community, whether that's our country or our world, in overlapping and bigger bullseyes. And if you're making decisions that are based on not just yourself, but on people who are beyond you, and that they are generationally good decisions, then maybe you actually have some good outcomes. But nobody is interested in that anymore. And that's how you end up in a gig economy where your net good is that you're going to run around and get a 1099 for delivering burritos, but you'll never be able to afford to live on your own. I do think that more navel-gazing instinct to look more and more like what solves my problem right now without regard to anything else. And if you want to look at the worst version of it, some of these corporate lobbyists seem to be in that category. So here's Li Fang talking about this. I think this is a good piece, and it plays into another thing about someone directly out of the Trump administration, a guy named Jason Miller. Some interesting stuff on that as well. Okay, so his story goes that outsourcing of lobbyists have astroturfed support for H-1B visas. During the Obama era, his former defense secretary, William Cohen, was pressuring Democrats to embrace outsourcing and H-1 visas, but he did not disclose that he was being paid by Indian IT clients. And so the story says that the report scratches the surface that he was covertly shaping information and policy. They were using paid media appearances. There were think tank reports demanding the importation of more H-1B visas. Why would that be good for Americans? In the short term, maybe it's going to benefit things like that IT business's ability to turn a profit. And what's the long term? That the children of those Intel or those IT companies may not live in an America that looks anything like the America they did. I went to the park the other day with my kids, and we pulled up, and if we had gotten out of the car, which we didn't, we would have been surrounded by about 40 Indian men who were not born in the United States, who speak with a thick accent and don't understand our cultural norms. How do I know that? Because I know who lives in this area. We have a ton of tech companies. This is exactly what happens. You've dramatically transformed every public park in my area, and I live in a suburb in like suburban Texas, America. And we have a massive population of Indian people. I've seen 3 people on a scooter riding down the streets in my little suburb, in my housing development. They're all little skinny Indian boys. That's not a thing that I would ever see an American set of boys do. Yeah, maybe you'd see kids on the handlebars and one on the pegs in the back, sort of an American version of that, before their parents saw them and yelled at them. But it's transformed the area we're in. And if you're not going to disclose that you're getting paid to do that stuff, that you are actually shilling on behalf of something, we've got a real problem. We actually have laws that are supposed to stop that, by the way. That story came to my mind simply because I was looking at this article. Li Fang covered this as well. This is a memo, an agreement memo from SHW Partners. SHW Partners, the principal operator, as I can understand it, is a guy named Jason Miller, who was one of the strategists for the Trump administration, or for the Trump campaign specifically. And they have a deal with the Republic of India, which will pay them a monthly fee of $150,000 in services beginning in April of this year. It goes for 1 full year at $150,000 a month. And I'm substantiating it based on some stuff that Lee put out, and then also my own little quick research, which didn't take a lot of time. This is Jason Miller. He's tagging Donald Trump over on True Social, where Trump is a member of the ownership. Says, we're leading the effort to bring peace between Russia and Ukraine, and the world is recognizing this leadership. This material is distributed by SHW Partners, LLC, on behalf of the Republic of India. For additional information, it's available at the Justice Department of Washington, D.C., which is to say the Office of Foreign Agent Registration, the FARA office. Isn't that wild? You have a guy that was basically running around helping Donald Trump get elected. And I based that based on him claiming to be a member of the Trump campaign, which is sitting here on the screen as well. It's small, but this comes from Legistorm, which is a pretty reliable outlet of where money is spent in politics. He was the CEO at Getter from June 21 to February 23. He was part of Donald Trump for President Incorporated from June 2020 to November 2020. He was a senior advisor there. And then also Trump for President 2024. He was working in February all the way through 2024, February of 23 to sometime in 2024 as a senior advisor. He also, based on some things that have been told to me, was the reason why Julie Kelly and Kyle Seraphin ended up having some significant issues about factually untrue statements that she made on X. And the story that the FBI was trying to kill Donald Trump with some innocuous language that happens in every single search warrant. I've been really clear about the entire sort of nature of the FBI. If you guys saw our Sunday sit down with Bill Taylor, if you didn't, I recommend it. If you did see it, then you know that the FBI is flawed beyond belief. And if they're willing to violate the civil liberties of people who work in the FBI, of course they're willing to go out there and violate the civil liberties of a former president or of you, just a person that's living in America. But that doesn't mean that their procedure is specifically targeting a man who was running for president. And it wasn't. It wasn't an assassination attempt on Donald Trump to serve that search warrant. It was a political assassination attempt. Obviously, they were trying to enact something and take him into a space that has never been there before, where you've got a government agency raiding a former president and discrediting him. But apparently, and this is what I was told by sources in the background, so I can't substantiate it 100%, but it seems like it follows the pattern. Jason Miller was out there and was behind the strategy to say that the FBI was trying to kill Trump. And Julie Kelly was the meaningful vessel for that. That was the argument made to me by several credible people. Now, if that's true, it would fall in line with the kind of guy that would take $150,000 a month to push the agenda of India while claiming to be someone who's America first. And that's why America first doesn't land for me. America only is the only part of it. It's like, I only care about America. I don't care about the other nations. If it also serves my interest, then I'm interested. But if not, I don't want it. This is Mark Levin, who's been pretty interesting of late and has been very, very nasty to people who don't agree with him. And Ben Shapiro, who people have basically, I think, have started to look at less and less credibly over the last couple of years, particularly because of some of the stuff he said about COVID vaccines and the positions that he held and his attempt to rewrite history on it. This is the two of them saying that you're not really America first if you don't agree with them and if you don't sort of back their take on Israel, which again, we're finding out more and more that people have all these really interesting moments of where their principles diverge from what we think it should mean. Because I don't know what America first is supposed to mean, but I know what it sounds like to me. So maybe you will have to answer the question for yourself. What does America first mean? Does it mean that America's interests come first and are second to no other nation if you're an American? Because that's kind of what I took it as. Apparently, it means that you have to also support Israel, which steals technology from the United States and is a counterterrorism or a counterintelligence threat. You have to believe a lot of things that I can't get those two words to mean if you do that. And again, this is more of that propaganda message. And of course, it's on Fox News. So this is another piece. You have to listen to what we say. Otherwise, you're not a good person, is the argument.
You and I, have people who we thought were conservatives sound a lot like the Marxist Islamists who were attending this event last week, don't they?
I think it's exactly right. Unfortunately, there's a grievance culture that has become the dominant strain on the left that says that all people in the world who are poor, who have bad lives, that is the fault of the West, that is the fault of Israel, it's the fault of capitalism, it's the fault of the Jews, it's the fault of anyone except for themselves. They have no agency, and thus all the systems must be torn down from the rooftops all the way down to the ground. And you see that sort of mirrored on a weird horseshoe part of the right that is now arguing sort of the same thing, that the problems that people have are intractable, that there's a shadowy group that's manipulating all of this, that America actually was never great. America was wrong in World War II. America never landed on the moon. And these kind of two forces are now bizarrely joining hands in the middle. It's very strange.
Do you think there's enough of an effort to push back? I find that conservative groups and conservative organizations that have these weekend events and these seminars, whether they're for young people or think tanks or that sort of thing, they sort of sprinkle these events with these kooks. They sprinkle these events with these American haters who claim to be American firsters and are fake MAGA and even stab the president in the back.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely an attempt by some of these organizations to, quote unquote, maintain the big tent. But the reality is that, as many have said, the problem with a big tent is that you may end up with many, many clowns inside. And the most fundamental thing is that just because you're saying somebody votes Republican, that does not mean that they ought to be the preacher at the front of the church. They're not the person who ought to be leading the movement if they are spending all day criticizing the president of the United States as covering up a Mossad rape ring or being a tool of the Israelis for hitting an Iranian nuclear facility, a thing he has said literally his entire career that he was going to do. And so it seems to me that if we are to hold anything in sort of reverence, it ought to be the fundamental tenets of the American Republic, which I believe to reside in conservatism. And if conservative organizations are simply going to give up the ghost on that in order to maintain a sort of pseudo-coalition, that is a gigantic moral and political mistake.
It's a really interesting thing that they've done there. What I watched was a conflation of the term conservative and Republican multiple times, which only goes out to a certain type of audience. I think Levin is on the weekends. My memory serves, he's on Saturdays. I could be wrong. You guys let me know. I can't watch Fox News, but I can watch that clip. I think Ben Shapiro is brilliant. If you guys don't know that. That's my opinion. My opinion is that Ben Shapiro is very, very bright. So he doesn't say things by accident. He's also really polished as a broadcaster. And so him making that slide between those two things, it's not on accident. And talking about, well, people who don't agree with me essentially are clowns in my tent. That's what the Republican Party is to those of us that are not Republicans, but have to occasionally or mostly align with them because there's no one else that's going to represent us in a big way. Now, they talked about a couple things. One, kooks who are infiltrating the movement and saying things that we don't like, right? That was one. And then the other idea was that you sort of like have to back the president of the United States because he's the president and he's a Republican, kind of indicating that we think that he's a conservative, but I don't think that's true. And I don't think Ben Shapiro would make that argument. By the way, Ben Shapiro made the opposite argument for a very long time and spent a lot of his time pushing back on Donald Trump. It's interesting to see them perfectly aligned on something for some reason and why they have to describe themselves. One of the people they describe as a kook is Tucker Carlson. Tucker Carlson is also incredibly polished and capable, and I would say brilliant. He's a brilliant communicator. Having watched him go up and hold an audience in the palm of his hand, he's very good at what he does. So you have to slander and smear people if you don't want to address the things they're saying. The smear that went out over the weekend, and it's the same sort of nonsense that I heard about why people on the political left are focusing on the incredulity that Speaker Mike Johnson called Trump an FBI informant. It's honing in on something without the actual context of it. We're going to address both of those as we kind of wrap this show up. Before we do, let me give you just like one quick second where you guys can see the Spotify ad that we're going to do. If you guys are listening on Spotify or one of those platforms, you may hear one right now. So there that is. This idea that Tucker Carlson apologized to Osama bin Laden. I saw this punched out in multiple places. It was actually a headline in a couple places. Tucker Carlson is a kook because he apologized to Osama bin Laden. How far the mighty have fallen, these people that were previously on Fox News. And then you put it in context. Like so many other things, you take these salacious claims and they are not the real story. Again, I don't think the real story is Donald Trump equals FBI informant against Jeffrey Epstein. The real story is how come Mike Johnson is not held accountable for the fact that he hasn't done the thing that he came into office to do? Here's the flip on Tucker Carlson. They claimed that he was being paid by Qatar. The documents don't back that up. This is a claim that this is the context under which it was claimed that he was apologizing to Osama bin Laden. You listen to me and tell me if you hear the same thing that I hear.
Let me just say, I would be totally comfortable sharing condolences with Osama bin Laden's family. I hate Osama bin Laden. On the other hand, if somebody dies, it's okay to say, I'm sorry to his family that
he had a toddler.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
That's immaterial. I would say that to the family of an executed murderer in a prison. It doesn't mean I support the murder or the murderer, but this is family. Like, that's okay. That's called like human decency. And anyone who's against that.
Yeah. And it seemed like we're setting up this.
We're setting up these straw men. Now, here's what I heard, and I'll put the chat on the screen as well. What I just heard was a man say, I don't have to agree with what someone did, but you can still offer condolences to a family that lost somebody. And how many of you have a family member that's done something awful? Maybe you've done something awful. And someone can still feel bad that you have cancer. People feel bad about Joe Biden having cancer, thinking that he was one of the worst things that ever happened to this country. And they don't wish death upon him. That's actually a pretty Christian thing to do. Someone could say that your spouse or your brother was convicted of murder and put to death, and you could still offer condolences to that family member. That's not the same thing. In fact, I think that's actually a really, really Christian idea, that you would do good to those who hate you, and you would try to pray for your enemies and ask for the blessings on there and forgive them. It's hard to do. It's really hard to do. I spent this whole Sunday thinking about how do I ingest hate from people who don't know me and then forgive them and actually pray for them to do better and pray for myself to accept it, because it's really, really not easy. It's probably the hardest thing to do as a human being. So he's talking about something I think is innately human, and then they call him a kook for his troubles, because we are in a headline-driven scenario where everybody is either part of the solution or they're a villain. We can't have anybody be in the middle ground. I'm confident that Anthony Fauci is not the worst person that's ever walked the earth, and he doesn't walk around doing evil and malicious things. I bet Bill Gates doesn't think that he's doing things evil. I bet he actually thinks that he is adding value and that people who hate him are wrong. And the truth is somewhere in between, I'm sure of it, because we're all sort of heroes of our own story. We don't do things because we think that we're doing evil. I covered this last week. It's the reason why Christopher Waltz was such a good Nazi in the movie where he plays it in Inglourious Basterds. It's because he doesn't think that he is evil. He thinks he's serving a good purpose. We're all doing that. And Tucker doesn't have to be right for him to have a reasonable opinion about that, and that's not a fair attack. In the same way that I don't like people going after Ben Shapiro because they think he's just nothing but pro-Israel. That's obviously not the case too. But he's a human being, and we're all, maybe worthy of a little bit of grace. That was my message for the weekend. That's what I took away from this weekend. There are people that are so quick to jump and judge on almost no information, and we all are potentially victims of that. That's what the propaganda battle has been. And it has made us think that we know more than we do, because we used to have to memorize things and have knowledge. And today, everything is one Google search away. Oh, obviously, this person is this. If somebody were to Google the quick facts of your life and then be able to pound them at you, would you be able to refute them? You have decades of experience being you. And someone's going to get a Google AI headline and they're going to be able to define who you are. You're the crappy human being who is the worst person ever because you took a baseball from a young boy at a Phillies game. You should be shamed and never should exist. They should throw you in prison and bury you underneath it. That was also something that came out this weekend. Maybe we even get the wrong lady. Maybe we get a woman who looks kind of like that lady and then we go out after her. We've come into a place where we've weaponized the attention span to the point where, and this goes back to the original point, Gen Z, those young people, they've grown up in an era where this is their reality, where they are picking teams based on almost no information whatsoever. I threw that thing about the Philly baseball game. What do I see? Immediately people are talking about the woman being terrible and the dad being weak. What if that dad just said, son, it's a baseball. This lady is nuts. And her life is full of no peace. She might be possessed by any number of things that are evil and dark. And we're going to just give it to her because that's what we believe God wants us to do. And I'm going to go out there and get you something really nice because I want this birthday to be very special. So I'm going to go show you the way that we do it. When some people are really afflicted, we don't make an issue of something that's just a baseball that we could pick up for $3. And we'll never forget how fun it was to come here to this game. We'll have the picture. I'm willing to scramble and get a ball, and one day you'll be able to do this to your kid. What if that was the message? Would that be a strong message for a dad? Because I'd still remember that if I was 8 or 10 years old and my dad had that conversation because some woman freaked out and my dad showed how to handle crazy people. You don't know what's going on in her life. Maybe her husband just died of cancer and all he wanted, was a Phillies baseball home run. I don't know. I don't need to make an excuse. In the same way that I don't need to say that Joe Biden was the worst human being that ever existed. I can look at things and have a little bit of context. What if we just reduced Joe Biden to this nonsense montage? Because I think some of us have. I don't have a lot of forgiveness for what this man did to my family, but I'm trying to. Because all the wild things that happened in my life in the last maybe 3 years have happened because of this guy and speeches exactly like this, which I knew were a lie. But how much do we blame on the people that accepted it and then took action based on it? And my bosses that had no courage to do anything about it? And how much do I have to blame for being part of an organization that maybe, if I was being honest, wasn't great from the beginning and always had this potential? It's the same story as listening to Bill Taylor, you guys heard. I did 5 hours of interview with that man. And what we walked away with was, you don't realize it until it hits you square in the face that, hey, maybe this thing is not the good guys. And when you realize that is probably not the same time when other people do. What other people do is get the headline. And the headline is, this guy's not the good guy. And they're like, yeah, he's not the good guy. There's so much more behind it. Think of all the intel that was fed to this man. I want to play you a clip about white supremacy. I haven't heard this at all, but cheering for drug dealers getting drone striked in the middle of the ocean with no declaration of war, and this is war, and we're going to play Vivaldi violin music that's high energy, and Jesse Waters is going to be the champion of it, and we're no longer doing small local enforcements. We're going to go out and bomb people in the ocean. That is the same as this. This is the same analogy. These systems exist just to keep us spinning after our tails, like the propaganda message, but the payoff is not the same as it was.
And we won't ignore what our intelligence agencies have determined to be the most lethal terrorist threat to the homeland today. White supremacy is terrorism. And white supremacists will not have the last word. And this venom and violence cannot be the story of our time.
Enough of us have the guts and the hearts to stand up. To stand up against the poison of white supremacy, as I did my inaugural address, to single out as the most dangerous terrorist threat to our homeland is white supremacy.
According to the United States intelligence community, domestic terrorism from white supremacists is the most lethal terrorist threat in the homeland. White supremacy is a poison. It's a poison running through, it really is. Running through our body politic. And it's been allowed to fester and grow right in front of our eyes. No more. I mean, no more. That the ideology of white supremacy has no place in America.
And by the way, that's an endless clip of him saying the words white supremacy. No definition of what the term means or how it exists. It's just accepted as fact. And a lot of that is the same sort of propaganda thing that we're seeing right now, talking about Israel's hold on 1 million people in the United States. Maybe some of that is true. There are people who are racist, 100%. There are people who are white supremacists. There are people who work on behalf of Israel. I think we've been kind of like nuanced about how that works. You may not even know if that is the case, if you've got money coming in. Tom Massey is now talking about the Epstein file, says we cannot avoid justice and embarrassment for very powerful men. Nobody ever has any specifics about who these men are. Nobody has any specifics about what happened. And every time I hear someone say what they think happened, there's almost as much evidence that it didn't as anything else. And all of that seems like a distraction, white supremacy, a distraction from the real problems, which was that, like, oh, our economy is crap. And you're bringing in a bunch of people here that are slowly driving up the cost of all the goods and the housing and everything else. You're giving away all of our public resources that might be able to help American poor, but instead are helping people from other countries that have no right to it and never paid into it and should have no expectation of being taken care of by our country. We're seeing a lot of the same stuff over here on the right here. Mike Johnson should be answering questions about why did you not come in and do the thing that you came in to do? Did you not come in here to solve problems related to funding our government in a transparent manner? And what are we going to be talking about? Republican Representative Thomas Massey said on Sunday that those who might be in the Epstein files, they've become like a box that people are hunting in an Indiana Jones movie, the Epstein files. We cannot avoid justice just to avoid embarrassment for some powerful men. We don't know who's in there. ABC goes on to note, appearing in the files is not indicative of wrongdoing or a crime. Then you have Ro Khanna saying there's enough votes in the House to force a vote on Massey's discharge petition, a rare bipartisan effort to try to compel the Justice Department, which, by the way, doesn't have to release anything, to release records of the convicted sex offender. We have 218 votes against 216 supporting it. There are 2 vacancies that haven't been reported much, but the 2 Democrats are going to be joining us, and they've committed to signing on. They're ready to tell the president to do something that the president doesn't have to do. Asked why he thinks President Trump is resisting releasing the files, Massey said, I think it's going to be embarrassing to some billionaires and some of the donors who are politically connected to his campaign. There's probably some intelligence agency ties to the CIA or maybe a foreign government, all of which is speculation. None of these things are fact either. And they take away from the problem. How about the hundreds of thousands of children that went missing under the Biden administration that I see almost no reporting on unless I follow what my buddy Aaron Stevenson is talking about? And when they go look into the sponsors that the Biden administration brought these people in, what happens? Oh, they find out that the children are dead. And they arrest them for child trafficking, which is the exact allegation that we were making 2 years ago. Why have we moved on from that? Let's throw another thing into the thing. Here's Donald Trump was an FBI informant, which he immediately walked back because he used the wrong words. Because occasionally when you're under pressure and you're speaking live, you say things inartfully. Here's Mike Johnson doing that, but he's not answering the real question, which is what the hell are you doing in that office if you're not going to give us single item, single issue appropriation bills?
And he's not saying that what Epstein did is a hoax. It's a terrible, unspeakable evil. He believes that himself. When he first heard the rumor, he kicked him out of Mar-a-Lago. He was an FBI informant to try to take this stuff down. The president knows and has great sympathy for the women who have suffered these unspeakable harms. It's detestable to him. He and I have spoken about this as recently as 24 hours ago. It's a terrible, unspeakable evil. He believes that himself. When he first heard the rumor, he kicked him out of Mar-a-Lago. He was an FBI informant to try to take this stuff down.
What? He was an FBI informant, right? So there you have him saying it. No, what he said is that Donald Trump was interviewed by the FBI and he did it wrong. And so this spun an entire news cycle in the same way that it spun an entire news cycle about Tucker Carlson is apologizing to something. That's not what he said. He said that he was an informant. Being an informant just means that you report to the FBI. And yeah, what did we have? We had a problem with the president saying that there was a hoax. Well, how could he be an informant on a hoax? And now everybody gets wrapped around the axle about a couple of words when they can't zoom back out and be like, no, what's the problem here? Our government is not serving us. We are getting propaganda and people are getting outraged about nonsense. We had an entire governmental structure that pushed forward lies for years. And they keep doing it. It just doesn't matter who's in charge. Here's another lie that has been going on. Yes, last week we covered a bunch about the vaccine. We cover the lies about vaccines and mandates and who is responsible in your agency. Again, the answer is not government. That's the conservative position. That's what Mark Levin, that's what Ben Shapiro normally would talk about. They've forgotten that, apparently. They're not into it anymore. The answer is not government. Actually, let me give you a Stephen Colbert clip, because that actually is as good as anything else. Here's Stephen Colbert telling you that the job of a doctor is to tell you what to do. People are so quick to outsource agency. And they want to give it to anything else so they don't have to take the responsibility for their own decision. That is not a conservative position. That's fine. That's what he holds. The Godverment position, that somebody advises government and government tells you what you must do, mandate you to do, and therefore they are going to take on the powers of God. And by extension, by telling you what you must do, they also take on the responsibility for the actions afterwards. Some of us don't want that. So again, the answer is not in government. I'll say it again. That's the conservative position. We keep seeing people who are not conservative represent like they're one and the same. Maybe that's the big propaganda ploy, to blur the line so that people believe that Republican/GOP, a branded political party, is the same thing as the values that the people who oftentimes have to vote with them would otherwise hold, and make you feel good about it when you ought not to.
Latipo made this insane statement about vaccine mandates.
Who am I as a government or anyone else, or who am I as a man standing here now to tell you what you should put in your body?
You're a doctor. That's who you are. Look at your name tag. You're supposed to tell us what goes in our bodies. Your job, sir, your job is to tell me to cut down on salt, and my job is to pretend that I did that.
Yeah, cut down on salt. You should cut down on salt and see what happens. Oh, it's because my blood pressure. All of this stuff goes back to this Cloward-Piven overlay. We create a problem that is so big that nothing else could handle it except Godverment. Except we actually do have a solution to that if you're a person of faith, and it's God and God-based communities underneath it. And that's always been the case. It's been the way that the entire country was formed until we started building structures. In God we trust. We built those structures, as you guys appropriately pointed out in our chat this morning. Yeah, in God we trust is what those structures will built upon. And then those structures began turning inward, and they immediately lost track of the mission of it, which was to protect the freedoms that are God-given. And suddenly they think that their entire mission is to support their mission, and that they must continue doing the mission, whether or not they're being successful for the people that it was supposed to serve. Again, the self-licking ice cream cone. And inevitably, that actually works really well for folks that are Cloward-Piven types. The vaccine mandates were a great example of it. The propaganda messaging that make people tune out completely and all they do is read headlines because there's so much overwhelming their brain. Fine, I'll just get, what's the narrative? I'm on it. Got it. What does Fox News say? We're at war and it's good. I'm into it. Yep, that's the best. Whatever Donald Trump says is my opinion. Oh, it changed and it doesn't make sense from what I said last week? That's okay. Because a bunch of people agree with me. Because we don't have to think for ourselves. We don't have to be critical thinkers. Most people are like that. Most people don't want to actually take the time to get knowledge base, have an understanding of history, and then say, listen, what you're saying doesn't actually align with what you previously said, nor does it agree with what I think. Well, how do you know what you think? Well, because I've actually thought about it for a little bit. I spent some time having an opinion based on some real information. And if you give me novel information, then perhaps I will change that opinion. Wow, that would be like a real critical thinking thing. That's like a throwback move. And if you do that, then you're probably part of the problem. This is a really wild little interview from Bloomberg, and I cannot help but put it in. The discussion of changing a historical position and revising it in real time today so that I can tell you that I didn't say what I said back then. This is the only way that people are able to do it. And the only way you can do that is if they have no short-term memory, if they have no long-term memory, and if they have no actual principles to base it on. If my principles are people on TV tell me the truth, Fox News tells me at war, it's good. Joe Biden says that we're fighting white supremacy, it's good. Deborah Burke, who was in the Trump administration, by the way, right? Was part of his COVID task force. She said that what they did at the time was not what they actually did, so now you believe them. You guys tell me if you guys remember someone saying other than this, because this doesn't seem like the memory that I have from 2020. And it certainly didn't lead into the 2021 where my life went off the rails. And many of yours did too, where you lost jobs, you lost friends, you lost family members who will no longer speak to you because you remember this. The original truth.
He was also asked how many Americans died during COVID. He could not answer and was asked specifically by the senator if the COVID-19 vaccine, if the vaccine from Operation Warp Speed actually saved American lives and how many. He wouldn't answer that either. What message is that coming now from the Department of Health and Human Services?
Well, I think we all know how important the COVID vaccine was. It was scientifically, critically studied to prevent severe disease. I think where people started to get confused is when we started to make potential claims that the vaccine did more than what it was studied to actually show. And remember, all of those original studies, we didn't test patients unless they had symptoms. We only looked for disease. And so we don't know how many people were asymptomatic. We don't know about protection against infection. What we did know about is protection against severe disease. And clearly, if you look at the mortality in individuals over 75 before vaccination and after vaccination, there was a dramatic difference, even through Omicron and Delta. So yes, the vaccine was highly effective for what it was intended to do, which was prevent.
Shouldn't the health secretary know that?
You know, I'm not sure that there's so much confusion about the COVID vaccine, what it was studied to do. I just want to make it very clear. It was studied to prevent severe disease, and that's what it does. And then I think the question is, well, who's susceptible to severe disease and who should continue to get the COVID shots? And I think that's what needs to be clearly laid out to the American people.
Got it. That's not what was laid out. Nope. Not even close, because some of us remember. And it reminds us that a system is what it does. And if a system lies to you, then it is a system of lies. If it tells you things that are objectively false to get its own ends, then it doesn't serve you. It serves itself. And that's when that system needs to be ripped down because it does no longer serve the original purpose for which we created it. And we're there right now, folks. Like one way or another, we are not going to solve this through voting. We are not going to solve this through an American government that self-writes. You're not going to vote your way out of it. You had an option. You got rid of Kevin McCarthy. We were going to get transparency in government. We were going to have the guy who just, got in the news again because of Epstein informant or of FBI informants on Epstein, which is nonsense. And nobody's asking him the real questions. Just like, hey, bro, did you or did you not come into office? Did you or not get the chair, the speakership option, specifically to give Americans control, America first control, so that America would be funding American interests with only one bill, with one funding at a time? Were we not going to fund every single line item individually? Wasn't that the entire purpose? Isn't that why you're there? Isn't that the power of the purse, the most powerful thing Congress has maintained hold over? No, it's not. It's not there anymore. The system is what it does. This is a Joe Rogan clip that I find very telling. If a system is what it does, and what it does is give you worse outcomes, why do we continue to tolerate it? We should be asking real simple questions. Is there a way that this can be righted? Nobody has an answer. The most likely answer, which is really unpalatable, is no. It cannot, because it has become so degraded that it no longer serves the original mission or purpose, protecting people from force and fraud from other people. No longer defends the rights that we used to believe were God-given. There is now a concerted push happening right now, including by people on the left and in media and just generally speaking, that those rights actually originate from the governmental structure itself. That's what happens when you have an ignorant population base. And a lot of that seems intentional, because who's teaching civics? Why is it that so many people tell me, oh, I didn't realize that some of these things were the case? I have not actually, I'm 45, 60 years old. I'm 75 years old. I've never sat down and actually read the United States Constitution. I swore allegiance to it. I get really excited about telling people that I love the Constitution. What's in it? What's in each article? What powers are delineated? Why do we not acknowledge the 9th and 10th Amendment? Oh, because you didn't even know what they were. If you can't say what all 10 amendments are you not in a bad spot? Especially if you swear allegiance to it, whether you're in the military or law enforcement. The system no longer is serving its purpose for which it was created. It's actually only serving its self-continuation. If you want to see an example of that, go look at what goes on in Canada. Go look at life expectancies when you're adding public health. That seems to be a net good. You add things like vaccinations. You add things like new medicines and health standards and EPA and all the other ideas that we had. They were all great ideas to begin with. What if we made a cleaner, safer, happier, better world for humans to live in? And then you realize that each of these systems are like, oh, my only job is to get more money for my agency, to grow it for the sake of the agency, and to continue keeping my job for the sake of being able to live in the world that is no longer as free as it was. The end result is eventually it collapses on itself. Canada's experiencing that. UK is experiencing that. A lot of Europe is experiencing that because their values are no longer in alignment with making the system serve the people that the system was created to serve. It just serves the system. Here's Kill Tony with Joe Rogan talking about it.
Canada's overall life expectancy.
Yes.
That might be the craziest statistic in the world right now. You've seen this, right?
Yes.
Since 1930, of course, it goes this way, this way, this way, this way, because you fucking live longer, because fuck technology and medicine. And then 2020 it levels, and then it starts to go down. It's down 2.5 years since 2020, which is unheard of.
Yeah.
Unprecedented. What could that possibly be from?
I don't know, Tony.
Weird.
So strange. It's not like there was a gigantic medical intervention that was forced upon the population during that time period.
Again and again, and booster and booster and booster.
And you're not allowed to say it, or you're a conspiracy theorist.
I guess
These people they're in a fucking trance because being on the side of reality and facts is so against the narrative that the liberals were correct that they're willing to ignore excess deaths. That we're willing to ignore an increase in all-cause mortality. That's shocking.
Yeah,
they're willing to ignore it,
and they're the trust the science people, but only when it leans to their favor.
The problem is that it's not just only the left; it's anybody, because a lot of people enforced things that did not actually believe in the things that they were enforcing, and that's where your problem comes from. It's people that actually trust systems, even though the systems have proven to themselves no longer interested in the original mission for which you signed up. And that's a real hard thing for people to do, because you're going to end up killing a part of yourself, that trusting part of yourself that says, life's pretty good. You can walk outside the door and it's still safe. You're not going to get, run over by some Mad Max machine that's trying to take out your freedom. And yet it happens slowly and incrementally. And we're all watching it happen. And none of us seem to have the ability to just go, this is no longer serving me. The system is what it does. And what the system does is actually provide more tyranny than it does net benefit. And that's what the trend looks like when your life expectancy starts going down and your expression of freedom goes down. It's hard to do because it means that it happened on your watch too. We all have a little piece of it to own. All right, that's the heaviest thoughts of the day. I've got something funny that'll show you what that looks like in the long run. If you guys are not subscribed over on YouTube, make sure you do that. If you're on X, you can find us at Kyle Seraphin. We're always on Rumble, but Rumble continues to screw with us. I'll tell you more about that over on Locals. And Locals is KyleSeraphin.com. You guys can support us financially there if you guys want to get in the game. Very much appreciate all of you who do. You get the Sunday sit down on Saturdays, so you get it a day early. But on top of that, you also can be a free member of the community. And this is what you're funding. This one-man operation here in this little room brings you whatever the thoughts are. Agree or disagree. That's my opinions on it. And I appreciate you guys having your own, and you guys share them with me over on Local. So that's really cool. And I enjoy reading because you guys often expand my mind. Here's a little taste of what it looks like if you just let the system run to completion Maybe you'll be inviting people who want to rob you and break the laws because now no longer the laws don't protect you. They protect the robber. This is a joke about someone getting robbed in Toronto under their current system.
Hey, get in here. Close the door. I don't want you to get bit by the mosquitoes. So, first of all, thank you so much for choosing my house to rob today. There's so many options. It's a privilege for you to be here. I've got a selection of drinks for you to choose from. Great choice, Fancy Perrier. I like it. Okay, so the kids are upstairs sleeping right now, and if they wake up, it's really going to make this whole experience very unenjoyable for you. So to streamline the process, I've got a few things laid out. I've got a 50-inch 4K for you. I've got a MacBook Air, and I even have a pair of earrings from Peoples gifted to my daughter for her baptism. And really, who needs it more, you or her, am I right? Now, hold on. You look a little familiar. You're the one who took my car last year. I knew I recognized you. I love repeat offenders. So I didn't want to take away the full joy of you robbing my house. So these are just a few items. If you head upstairs to the master bedroom, my wife's jewelry is laid out for you. Take whatever you want. Head downstairs. You'll find my safe wide open for you. Take whatever you want. Now, I'm going to be in the kitchen making myself a sandwich. If you have any questions, feel free to come and join me. What's mine is already yours.
Yeah. That's a joke, except that's kind of the way the government actually looks at all of our stuff, isn't it? Because the system doesn't serve the people who are in it. That's why they feel entitled to your stuff. That's why cutting the tax rate is considered, it's a spending cut. They're worried about, or they consider cutting it is actually like they're saving you money when they cut taxes because they feel entitled to your money in the first place. It's their money first. My buddy Ryan Matta is doing a lot of that, and he's very upset. That's why he's going to El Salvador. We'll talk about that more another day. If you don't speak Spanish and all you know how to do is English with a weird Mexican accent, maybe El Salvador is not the place for you. Maybe it is. What do I do? I hope you guys have a great day. I look forward to seeing you again tomorrow. I've got more of this. I actually grabbed probably 3 times as much as for a real show. So we'll put that out there, and we'll be doing it again tomorrow at 9:30 Eastern Time, 8:30 here in Texas, America. God bless you. Have a great day, and I'll see you then.
Thanks for listening to The Kyle Seraphin Show, streamed live weekdays on rumble.com/Kyle Seraphin. Follow Kyle on Twitter, Truth Social, and Instagram at Kyle Seraphin.